Hello, boys. How are we?
Very well, very well.
Good.
Still angry?
Good. Well, this is going to be an angry podcast. We brought Amoruso Lets It Run Scott on to try and keep us semi-sensible or pour petrol on the bonfire that it is. Scott, you can decide what part you want to play in that.
Give me time to try and figure out where I want to enable this chat or actually try and try and actually be a dissenting voice. We'll see how it goes.
We'll see how it goes. Obviously, we'll do live to YouTube as is. This is my story style when shit hits the fan or when things go tits up. So fire in your questions, your statements, if there's anything else you want us to discuss. We'll go through basically today's announcement, reshuffle, if you can even call it that. We'll talk about the current situation where we're at. We'll discuss Motherwell. We're obviously on the back of a home defeat to Motherwell, 1-0 home defeat. We obviously got a bit of an international break now. I'm that angry that I haven't even commented or cared that Ando is wearing a Scotland top. But next home game's Aberdeen, we'll look forward to that as well, and we'll just chew the fat, try and use it as a therapy session and see if we can make Kev smile. Sound good?
Good luck.
Sounds good, but I was going to say it sounds great, but unrealistic. There's no way Kev's smiling.
Very true. Right, well, do we start? Do we start where we might as well? So today's announcement, Scott Amoruso, we'll call you that since we've got, and in fact I'll call you Scott and him Ando, because it's easy since you're both Scott. So we'll start with you, Scott. Where does it leave? Where do you feel it leaves the club today? Is it made you sleep easier tonight with a reshuffle? Is it lip service? What's your thoughts on where we are right now?
I think they're buying time at this precise moment in time. I do think that they're just hoping that over the course of the next 6 or 7 games, something turns round. So I do think it was really just a case of trying to, I can't say distract the fans, because if anything, it's just heightened their frustration and our sort of disdain at what's been going on over the last few months. But I certainly think it's nothing but a time-buying exercise. All the sort of gusto and bravado and bullishness that we've heard in some of the press conferences from our chief executive a few months ago about succession planning, you can see quite clearly the evidence is there. I don't think there is succession planning in place at Tynecastle. I don't think we've got a proactive or efficient board, and unfortunately we are reaping what we sow just now.
Yeah, Sando, it's difficult to argue against any of that.
No, definitely. I've used this phrase before, but see, just now it feels like a rudderless ship. It's just a case of, right, we've had a management team installed. We've had to sort of manoeuvre in order to satisfy UEFA demands or whatever, and see now it's just stupid, right? If you're on the outside looking in, you look at it, you just go, it's fucking amateur hour. It just looks crap. It really does look crap, and I'm at my end of my tether with it, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Kev, Scott had mentioned there it's a holding piece, the next 6-7 games. Do you realistically see Naismith getting that amount of time as things stand currently?
No, is the simplicity of it all. The problem I see with the next 6 or 7 games is they're the toughest 6 or 7 games you're going to have. You've seen the fixture list come out. Opening game, okay, away at McDermott Park, a location that has not been our best place to play football over the past 10 years. Let's be honest. However, went out, actually laid a half decent performance on the park. And you thought, okay, things might look okay. But since then, all we have seen is I would class as, and given that Ando's told us not to swear, dross would be the actual title I would give it. And we now go into a series of games over the next couple of weeks of September and into October, where you are playing against the teams that, in all honesty, we should be competing against. Celtic, Rangers, we've got Hibs, Aberdeen, and I think the other game that we've got out with the cup game against Kilmarnock, I think is against Livingston. And we know perfectly well how we perform there. So, no, I don't see him getting...
I think actually you're right to point it out. I think we play... So we were just double-dunted home games, Motherwell, then into the Aberdeen game after the international break. We then play 3 away games in the space of a week. I think we play...
St Mirren, Kelly,
I think it was at St Mirren, Kilmarnock, and then Ross County.
Yes.
And then I think we're back into a double dunter at home games. I think we play Hibs or something next.
Hibs at home, Celtic at home, Rangers away to round off October.
That is, we said at the start of the season that it's a point that's probably well trodden or whatever. That we wouldn't even have this conversation if we're winning, right? That's the point as to where we're at right now. Is if just the sort of target that we painted self-inflicted on our own back by the sort of optics of how all this looked, we could have shut everybody up by going out and winning football matches. Football's a simple game when it comes to shutting fans up and dousing flames, etc., etc. You go out and you perform on the park. To think that we went from the highs of Rosenborg, we rode our rock, but we played well. I think we righted a wrong from the season before. I think we exercised the demon. We played well. The stadium was good. The atmosphere was good. And since then, we've rolled into here, where we're out of Europe again with a pretty shambolic away performance. Yeah, PAOK are a good team and they've got good credentials. But let's be honest, 3 of the first 4 goals were self-inflicted, terrible defending. Motherwell's goal, terrible defending. So I disagree with Scott. I understand what he said. That I don't think Stephen Naismith gets 6 or 7 games. I think he gets 90 minutes on Saturday the 16th against Aberdeen, and we are pitchforks, bed sheets, plaza protests by 6 p.m. Saturday night. Is my current opinion. Scott, reason I hang with you on the day is obviously I read your blog thing that you posted, which was brilliant. I think it nailed all the points. I was on Kickback earlier discussing that what really has wound me up the most, or what I'm really the most disappointed about right now, is how we always seem to end up back here discussing some crazy decision made by the board that impact the game massively. That's got to change, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of it boils down to the board being like most football boards and sort of acting from a very sort of reactive standpoint. And I get that, you know, what they've said a few months ago off the back of letting Robbie Nielsen go seemed to sort of go against that. That did seem to be quite a proactive decision. They could have waited until the summer. They obviously thought that there was a certain amount of jeopardy regarding trying to get first spot, trying to get that guaranteed European prize pot money. So they felt that it was worthwhile, you know, taking that step and making the change a little bit earlier than maybe some of us would have imagined at the time. But their actions since then have suggested that they really do just react to things happening around them. If they were proactive, would they have potentially known more about the rules and regulations around Stephen Naismith's position in European games? Would they have had a better succession plan in place, not just up until the summer, but even from the summer onwards? There's a lot we don't know about Stephen Naismith as a coach and as a manager at first team level. So surely you should imagine they've still been looking at other options over the last couple of months in not the hope, but the realistic expectation that this was always potentially going to happen. So yeah, it's really frustrating because from a business standpoint, you should never stand still. But as I mentioned in the blog earlier today, we seem to have been doing that quite a lot now as a club. And I think there's a big fear factor within the club. And I think that drives some of our decision making. I think there's a fear of the unknown. I think that the appointment of Daniel Stendhal a few years ago still bears an impact and weight on the decision making of the board even up until this point. And there's been a fear of other things that have led us into making silly decisions. Take, for example, handing Robbie Nielsen a 3-year contract last year. where was the fear and the jeopardy there in that decision making? Were we frightened as a board that we were going to lose him to another team? I've got nothing against him as a coach, and he had a ceiling as a manager, and he done well. But Robbie Neilson isn't going to go any higher than Hearts. Why did we have to give him a 3-year deal, which consequently has maybe meant that we don't then have the coffers to look out of the club and look externally when it comes to looking at his replacement. So it goes round in circles, and unfortunately for the board, you keep coming back to the same individuals and the same group of people, and it's becoming more about them and less about, albeit some of the responsibility that the team and the manager should be taking just now. But unfortunately, because it's not the first instance this has happened in recent history, we are now starting to look from top to bottom now.
Exactly. Kev?
Scott just mentioned there just now about expectation. And it's a very interesting point. McKinley said back at the beginning of the year that himself and the board have an expectation level. And that expectation was to start to put more pressure on the Ugly Sisters in Glasgow. It was to be really starting to dominate at home and our home fixtures, and etc., etc. I then started to believe everything he was saying. My question to everybody else is, do you think that McKinley has actually not got a grasp of what our expectation level is? Because he's not putting that forward, as far as I can see, to the players and everybody else in the club to say that this is where we want to be, and quite clearly you're not actually meeting your objectives.
So I think to potentially defend Andrew McKinley, it's possible that he does truly believe that. So when he's telling us that he wants a proven winner as a manager and he wants to split the Old Firm and he thinks that we are outright the third biggest club in the country, I think he genuinely believes that. The problem with that is then leads you to believe that there's a split in the board and they're not all singing off the same hymn sheet. Because Anne Budge historically has talked about, I think when Robbie was third or fourth, it's fine. Craig Levein, he's not bomb-proof, but if he's in the top 4, then that's fine, and we'll review at the end of the season. So there's historical reasons to believe that there's already a potential split in terms of how they view these types of scenarios. You've then got to throw in Jerry Mallon and the other board members into it, then potentially what sort of influence Joe Savage has, albeit not as a board member, but sporting director of the club. So it could be that we're all being quite unfair on Andrew McKinley because he's been the public figure over the last few months, but he is maybe sitting there in boardrooms quite as frustrated, maybe not as frustrated as us, but maybe on a similar level where he's thinking, I'm trying to make them understand that I've been saying to these fans that we should be looking to split the top 2, we should be looking at bringing in proven winners, but yet we've just hired the B team coach. So maybe there is something in that, and that we just don't know what's going on, and unfortunately it's leading us to hypothesize and maybe incorrectly.
Don't we love it?
Well, I think that I'm a big believer, I always have been, that once something can be a coincidence, right? Something can happen once and you go, right, fine. These things happen, it's football. Twice, 3 times, 4 times, that's a trend. That means there is a consistent voice or road or wherever it is, a comfort blanket, a safety blanket that they always go to. Right now, I'm assuming that it's not lost on anybody that the Craig Levein, Robbie Neilson scenario and structure is pretty much the exact same as the McAvoy and Naismith structure. You have an old seasoned pro head with an unexperienced new coach. I think Robbie was maybe even our under-18s manager at the time when Budge and stuff came in, and they promoted him up to first team when they got rid of Gary Locke and put Craig Levein in the position of tenure and say, right, he's the old pro, he knows the things, let him deal with the sort of noises of a changing room and the things that come out of a football club and be there to guide a young and inexperienced coach. We're exactly the same way there. We also have the exact same situation as Daniel Stendhal had. He walked in, wasn't allowed to bring in any of his own coaches, was told to work with what you have and deal with what you have. And this, Stephen Naismith was the same. He's been left with Gordon Forrest right now. I don't know the merits of Gordon Forrest's coaching. I've never played football for him. I don't know. But he was part of the setup that was deemed not a success or had ran out of steam in the previous setup. So Naismith, no, you're not bringing in your own staff. You have to work with the guys that are already here. we've brought back Liam Fox. Again, a guy that was part of the Craig Levein army of folk that we moved out of the club because we deemed him to be not good enough anymore or whatever and he's now back, having been all over the shop and failed. We have now a consistent pool of evidence to say that a harebrained idea is saying put Naismith in, and then as Scott said, oh shit, he doesn't have the qualifications, we should probably fix that. Actually, we now have a rolling evidence of this board and the consistent voices that have been on it since pre-Andrew McKinley, pre-Malin, pre-Andrew Brown in the Foundation Hut. We are now seeing consistently the same comfort blanket go-to, idiotic, fix a problem with a crazy solution. We've seen it for the last 6-7 years. So again, it all points to that there must be something on the board where, because I can tell you now that the Foundation of Hearts surely haven't signed this off. They cannot have been, yeah, that's a brilliant idea. Let's give it to the under-18s manager backed up with the academy head. There is no chance that that can be happening. So somewhere on that board, we've got someone that constantly wants to go back to what they've known and they've known has worked before.
I
think that needs to change.
On you go, Andrew.
Cheers, man. I was going to say, this is probably a savage way of looking at it, right? And apologies for the language I'm going to use here, but if you look at exactly what Corbett's talking about, and I think I might have said this before, just in slightly different terms, is that over 10 years, maybe probably slightly more than that, it's almost as if it's almost like a cancer. It's like there's something there, right, which causes all this, and it grows and it grows and it grows, and then things change, but you never ever get rid of it. So it's like we're not cutting enough away to actually save the patient. They're always fucking riddled with it because it grows back and it grows back. And I know that's a really, really harsh shit description for it, but that's what it's like. There needs to be a complete and total overhaul, because I can't put my finger on it. I don't know who it is. I don't know what it is, but the same thing happening, as Corbett rightly says, is a trend. It's not a one-off. It's not a fluke. It's consistent. And is it a case of, right, we bring new people in, we bring this person in, we bring that person in, and they get affected by the people that were there before that are maybe the outgoing incumbents or whatever? Again, it's difficult to narrow down exactly what it is, but it's horrible. And it's growing and it's evolving.
I think Scott said it right earlier when he said about its lack of proactiveness. It's sitting in right now. If again, I'm going to say Ambudge because there's obviously other people in there, right? But Ambudge would have probably stuck with Robbie and just see where it goes, because you're going to have good seasons, you're going to have bad seasons. We'll go up and down. That's what Hearts do, and it's easy. It's the easy thing to do. And that I think that's what I worry is that they sit and they go, right, you've lost away at Aberdeen and we got beat. It's fine. International breaks come in. We'll wipe it off and we'll be back to our usual self next week. Robbie's told me everything's fine. It's cool, so I believe him. Cool. The next game comes. We've been beat at home by St Mirren, or we lose at Livingston. I don't worry about it. It's a plastic pitch. Like I've got it sorted. And that's the stuff I think where actually a proactive board with the Andrew McKinleys that have aspirations to be more than just comfortable in third and fourth, wants to be better, wants to expand, get more fans in, get a bigger stadium, finish in Europe, potentially win trophies. They maybe know, actually, wait a minute, what is the contingency plan for Robbie? Because the style of football's rubbish and the results have dried up. So fans aren't going to pledge, they're not going to come back to watch us week in, week out, struggling to beat Livingston, etc. And I think personally, Scott, and I don't know you agree with it or no, but I think that's the club gets just too comfy, it gets too cosy where it is, and then can he react when things didn't go well?
I think the board almost act in a seasonal manner, if that makes sense. And I think they look at it from a business point of view, and the timing of Robbie's poor form probably went against them more than the form itself, if that makes sense. So it came at a time in which it looked like we were going to lose out on the European prize pot money, and also season ticket renewals start getting discussed. And I suppose the concern that we probably have now as a support is that the season ticket money's banked, the foundation money gets banked month by month, the strips have all been sold, all 3 of them very well. So the hospitality packages have already been getting snapped up. So where's the consequence
where's the risk
for this board if they decide to stick with Naismith and decide to set out? Because ultimately, with football boards, it's the same as with politicians when they're hiring their cabinet. They'll look at someone, they'll bring someone in. Now, if that person is a complete and utter numpty for the first 3 months and look like it's not salvageable, they won't make the decision then. And the reason for that is that looks bad on them. So if they bring somebody in and only lasts 3 months, looks bad on them. If they bring them in and they give them enough rope to hang themselves with and it lasts 18 months, it then starts to look more on that individual rather than on them themselves. And I do think this is a concern, is that because there's no sort of jeopardy or risk, as Ando was saying there, in terms of monetary value, they might decide to ride this out until Christmas, because they've done that with Levine. You know, they'll let that go on and on and on and on. By the time they made the decision, it was nearly too far gone. Yep, there's things that Stendhal could have done differently as well. But yeah, things definitely went too far gone by that time. I think one of the things that everyone's lost focus on or sight on so far as well over the last few days is that this decision to hire Naismith didn't just have an impact on the first team, but it also has an impact on the B team and the academy as well. You know, we've taken away the continuity that they were starting to grow in those 2 parts of the business. And Hearts have talked years and years about how they need to get the academy fixed. We need to start, you know, earning money on these investments. You know, these guys that we start coaching from under 10s upwards, we need to start bringing money on them. Well, we've just removed that continuity strand that we had in there to be head coach for a couple of months and now assistant manager to a guy who's, you know, 1 foot out the door. So what happens with McAvoy if we decide to make that decision on Naismith? Is he tainted to the extent that we can't then put him back in that position? So it really, you know, again, you look at it and it's an absolute mess when you start looking at it just past the point of view of the first team.
And again, that then all of that culminates and comes back to how did you pitch that in a board and get people to put their hand up and say, "Yep, that is the right avenue for this football club to go down." Like that's what worries me the most out of all this, because we are 4 random guys that have never run a football club or been managers or got any form of license other than a driver's license, and we can see for a mile away that even if it does work, what's the long-term output of all this stuff? Like, where does it go, and what happens if it genuinely doesn't work? Because, like you've just said, you've gutted your academy, you've gutted your B team, and now you've gutted the first team, because you're going to have to get rid of the head coach, the technical director, and the first team coach. You also have to replace the academy lead and the B team manager for one short-term fix solution thing. It just, for me, it doesn't make any sense. And the more the club, I know I've said this now, I'd be absolutely livid if we hadn't had a statement now, but the more I hear from the club, the more I'm like, honestly, man, just shut up. Just shut up. No media duties, no nothing. Just win on the 16th, then tell us what the plan is, because I'm sick of hearing fees, because it infuriates me.
But mate,
they seem reluctant. Oh, sorry, on you go, Andrew.
No, on you go.
I know what you're going to
ask.
I
was going to say,
if there's anything. Sorry, mate. There's nothing on YouTube. Nothing on YouTube that's worth. And by the way, not that we don't welcome the comments on YouTube, but there's nothing that ties into the conversation we're having just now, really. So yeah, sorry, mate. Carry on.
No, it's right. All I was going to say is they seem really reluctant to make things easier for themselves as well. Now, there's an individual who's already working in the club. He's on the payroll, and I get that, you know, McKinley comes from a predominantly rugby-based background, and Budge has always been quite transparent in saying that she doesn't know a lot about the game and in terms of on the field as well. And it could be the case that, you know, the other people on the board are of a similar sort of disposition. Gary Locke's sitting there. Why can't you just use him in an advisory role and say, right, are we going right here? Are we going wrong? They seem happy to have him as this, and I hate to. This is going to be quite disparaging, and I don't mean that towards Gary himself, but he's almost like a sort of match day mascot. You know, they keep him around. He's a familiar face, and he's a great guy. So he's great to have around the club. But they're not using him to his potential. He is someone who could not only advise from a football perspective, but also he could plug some of the communication gaps that I believe exist between the board and the foundation of Hearts down to the fans themselves. But for some reason, they don't want to take these easy steps. They keep convoluting this process and making it more difficult for themselves. And that's why it gets so annoying. I don't think they maliciously do it, but there's this subconscious complacency that means that they just sit back and just wait for things to sort of blow up in their face before taking action.
And a matter of 6 months ago, well, maybe longer than that, we had Jim Jeffries on the board in that same role, who would give advice to those who had no footballing ability footballing knowledge in regards to it. Right? And we then brought in a new team, and Jim sort of took a step backwards. I know his health had an impact as well, etc., etc. But I was at hospitality on Sunday, and Billy Brown was there, and the team was announced on Sunday. And Billy Brown went, "That's a joke." Now, Billy Brown is, again, another individual who I think the club hold in high regard, like Gary, like Jim Jeffries. If they can see it, why are the club not then making that move to get somebody like that in? As you rightly say, they've got Gary Locke there, who, let's be honest here, done a fantastic job. Situation the club get a team of young kids playing together, playing half decent football, let's be honest. And had they not been impacted.
Fucking hell, man. Apologies, folks.
Is Kev a robot for everybody, or just
no? It's not. It's
mate,
no,
it's fine. He's
well.
blabbing on saying that Gary Locke's team played good football. They were absolutely torture. But
Kev's Ryanair broadband is just not working. So
just mute him. Oh, yeah, he's back.
Actually, the broadband kicks in after you finish making your shit point, Kev, so it's maybe not all bad.
Okay. See, I've said, and I've put it to you guys before, obviously my background, where I work here, and I work for a high-functioning business right now. High-functioning businesses deliberately employ agitators. They bring people in that will look under rocks, will deliberately push and look in the corners and say, that doesn't work, that needs better, this needs changed. I believe, Scott, you mentioned him earlier, Daniel Stendhal came in, and I think he took one look at everything around the training, the academies, the style, the players, and said, no, this is miles off where it needs to be. He took shots at the club captain, Jake Mulroney famously coming out training with his AirPods in, all that sort of, like, he had one look around the place and started picking fights. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand that in the background he was a mess of a man in terms of himself and keeping to schedules and how disorganised he was. But since then, we really haven't had, I said this when I was on Sportsound a week or so ago, and I always come back to this, right? When Steven Gerrard took the Rangers job, he took it on the promise that Ian Durrant, Gordon Durie, Ali McCoist, all the shadows in the corridor that were here for a bygone day when the club was successful, that were sitting in positions, bin them, get rid of everybody. I want to bring in everybody myself. I want everybody from sports analysts to scientists to physios to club doctors to coaching staff, the scouts that they send out today, opposition analysis. He brought everybody, because he was like, if you want to be a successful football club, you can't have anybody gone, that's not what we used to do under Walter. That wasn't when we won 9 in a row in 1991. Walter Smith would never have had that, and he got rid of all that because he was like, it's no conducive to what we're trying to build. And that's why, not the Rangers podcast, but Giovanni Van Bronckhorst was left with the shitty stick, because he came in a bit like Daniel Stendhal, no backroom staff, because Gerrard took them out of Villa and was like, what did I do? He was working with the under-18s coaches. I think the under-18s coach took the semi-final that Hibs scudded them 3-0. And I genuinely believe that's what a club like Hearts need. After Robbie Nielsen, who knew the club inside out and knew how to get them to a certain plateau to say, this is where we are, this is what we do, right, how do you build on that? How do you build on that? Because right now we're going backwards. We'd be in a better position now with Robbie Nielsen in the dugout than we are currently, and that, like, all the facts and stats show that. So how are we building as a club? And that worries me, Scott. That's what worries me right now. Is this doesn't change anything. Naismith coming in here, we'll be in this situation in 12 months' time if he stays.
So, and I'm not saying this for as gospel, but this is just a potential, situation that could be arising at the club just now. Who's to say that certain members of the board or the board as a whole don't view that situation the same way you do, Corbett? It could be that there's someone, albeit maybe not fully on the board, but has an ear on the board, and he is maybe saying, well, I don't want somebody coming in and reinventing the wheel, because where does that leave me? Where they'll bring in people internally that aren't going to rock the boat because they understand or they're grateful for the position of being in charge at Hearts. Let's face it, if Stephen Naismith hadn't been given this gig, he would be, having to earn his corn and earn his stripes, maybe, League One or maybe Championship in Scotland.
Exactly.
So is there potentially a case where there's individuals who are self-serving? And again, I'm not saying it as fact, but there could be other things like this going on. And this is where it boils down to communication. And this is, again, one of the fundamental problems at Hearts, and has been for a while. The lack of communication leads to this vacuum for speculation, and we're all coming up with our crazy theories, aren't we? I mean, I'm suggesting Joe Savage has got his finger in all the pies when he might not, and we'll all have our own theories. And unfortunately, the club are creating this situation amongst all the other situations that they're creating because they're not plugging that communication gap. You would think with the foundation of Hearts, that would be an easy gap to fix. But for some reason, the foundation of Hearts are very adept at hiring accountants and people that are really good with business acumen, but they don't really have a grasp on how to properly engage with football fans. And again, it's another missed opportunity, which for some reason we're having to discuss a number of years after the foundation of Hearts were initially founded.
Aye, and I'll come to you in a wee second, and I think that point's a good one with the foundation of Hearts. What I think the foundation of Hearts find themselves in now is that they sewed up the heartstring stuff. The club almost went bust. You need to pledge, secure the future, etc., etc. But where do you go now? Like, we aren't in immediate danger of going out of business. So how do you engage with the next group of folk coming through? How do you engage with young fans? How do you get them to pledge when they turn? How do you get it so it's not just the dad generation and us that have set up the direct debits, and then the youngsters, they just, it fades into nothing because there's no need to pledge because the club's in a good space, etc., etc. And I think that's where you're right. We need massive inroads in that, like a weekly blog or something where they're, there's can they not go and interview players and talk about, what's your thoughts and what do you think about being fan owned, and like interact with the club and the fans in that sense, if you know what I mean. And you're very much spot on. Radio silence. We've got no fights to fight anymore. We're used to going fighting to stay at Tynecastle, to stave off administration, all that sort of stuff. When we didn't have information, this is what happens. We start putting two and two together and getting five. We start taking punts at the kit man, at the under-18s women's coach, like you just go mental because you didn't hear anything. So there is nothing to base where you're at. Ando.
So to touch on a couple of things that have been said, so that whole point about fan engagement is definitely a really, really good one. And for me, it all boils down to the fact that we're almost a little bit immature in our approach when it comes to fan engagement, because it's almost a case of, right, we've got the foundation of Hearts, as long as there's money coming in there, right, and basically the strapline for that is things are fine as long as we're not in danger of going bust, right? That's almost the way it feels, right? But to Scott's point about accountants, is it just put a light bulb off in my head just there, not literally a minute ago, which is everything that we've done recently. If you look at it, right, if you take a step back, it's the cheap way of doing things, right? So hiring internally, right, so the whole Stephen Naismith, Frankie McAvoy thing, it's the cheap way of doing things. We've always done things on the cheap. Like, no one's saying that we don't spend money on players. That's fine, right? You can spend money on players. And I made this point in our WhatsApp group chat probably about a week ago now, which is, why is no one on the board able to be able to roll the dice and just say, you know what, let's spend a bit of fucking money on getting the right people in. For me, fan engagement, it's immature in its approach, and we do things on the cheap. I think everything that's happened in the last 6 months, you can fit under one or both of those two umbrellas.
I think that I agree with you. I do agree with you, but that approach I'm not completely and utterly against. On the face of, as long as it's not just cheap for the sake of being cheap. Like, we also have to be realistic as to where we shop. We've spoke about this before. You know, you can have Burberry and Prada taste, but we shop in TK Maxx. We just have to deal with that. Where I'd like the club to invest some money is where they'll see returns. So Shanklin's here. He's here now until January at least. Let's increase the wage bracket and see if we can keep him. Get him to extend a contract, because if he scores another 20, 30 goals this season, you're in a more or a better position of power come the time that somebody does chap our door with a checkbook to say, we're not going to sell him for 3 million, it's 13 million now, or whatever. And Scott's made the point there about the academy. Like, we released Aidan Denham for all intents and purpose in December of last year, January last year. He's now considered someone that I'd quite like to see in the team. Andy Irving, he went away to Germany, albeit I think we were arguing and fingering over paying him £600 a week or £1,000 a week, I think was his demands, and we wouldn't give him it. I think he's now, did he sign for West Ham in the transfer window? Like, Aaron Hickey, we sold basically at the last minute because we managed to get a deal, agreed to some crazy sell-on clause that wasn't a percentage. We took a 6-figure sum. He went for 30 million 2 seasons later. You look at Josh Doig at Hibs, again, we released him. He's went to Bari or wherever he's ended up in Italy, and he's rumoured to be gone somewhere else or wherever. And again, you invest it properly, then you see a return on your money. I think someone posted it on the pre-season about Aberdeen and how much turnover the past 4 seasons, selling Ferguson and Cosgrove, etc. Osman Igor Rossi. I think we managed to get some money for Aaron Hickey, but we've sold absolutely nothing. We've given Kai Rouse a 5-year deal because we seen pound signs after the World Cup. You'll be lucky if you get a game for Poundland. Like, he's a shadow of the boy that he was. Like, again, they all come down to the fact there's someone actually I was discussing the other day said that since 2021 we've signed 13 players. It'll be 14 if Kenny Vargas signs in the summer, where we have paid 6-figure transfer fees to trigger release clauses. There's 14 players since 2021 where we have paid a transfer fee to get them to come to Hearts. You know, on average, if it's £300,000, Shankland we know was about 600,000. That's millions of pounds that Hearts have spent for what? I think Shankland, as it stands now, is our only sellable asset. I think Cochrane and Kent, potentially people would buy. Rowles, if we can get Halkett back and transform him, potentially, but everybody else, we spent money on George Grant, Aaron McIntosh. These players are rubbish, Scott.
But what you've mentioned there is it kind of does chime in with what Ando said as well about being cheap. I don't think we're cheap across the board, but I think there seems to be a lack of value in a manager. So we do seem to be intent on, spending money on players and spending money on, building the infrastructure within the stadium to try and obviously help bring in more through hospitality and through the hotel and through the restaurant, which is all very sound business acumen. But then we look at the individual worth of a manager and we don't seem to deem it worthy enough. And again, I don't know if this goes back to, because this is where I struggle to understand that this is something that the likes of Anne Budge and Andrew McKinley are deciding. Is this something where Joe Savage is saying, recruitment, that's where we get it. If we get the recruitment right and we get the right players, we can get by with whoever we bring in as a manager. We can go with that boot room legacy sort of policy that Craig Levein wanted. We'll just bring in the next B team guy. Liam Fox would be the next one, for example, and they'll be able, as long as we get recruitment right and you let me delve into the markets that I want to delve into and do the deals that I want to do, then that'll work. So this is where, again, I feel like we need a bit of transparency for the board. We need to understand who's making these decisions, because just now it's just these circular conversations we're having every couple of weeks about, first of all, who's responsible, and secondly, what they're going to do about it, if anything.
Here's a quick one before we go. We'll go around the houses. Are we at protest level to remove the board, or is that pant wetting as it stands right this very second? Scott, what's your thoughts?
General rule of thumb, I think in today's age, I think protests can be a bit reductive. I don't think they don't have the same impact. I think people are a bit more passive.
Didn't say that, you'll break Corbett's heart.
Well, no. So me and Corbett come from a time where it had its day, right? I remember protesting against Chris Robinson 20 years ago, and I remember that as a teenager there was a mixture of frustration but also excitement to be in a party, something like that as well. I think times have moved on to that, and I think it would be difficult to really get past the majority of fans that are probably quite passive when it comes to those types of things. I think people have now got into the forcey habit of venting on WhatsApp, venting on social media, and I think it would be very difficult to, albeit you could get the consensus on a social media platform to say, yeah, we're very much behind removing either the manager or the board or both. I think it'd be very difficult to mobilise that group and get them into being a sort of cohesive sort of group moving forward. And trust me, Corbett, if there's somebody that could do it, it would probably be somebody like you, given what you've managed to achieve with the Ultras. But I think this would possibly be a bridge too far. And I think
don't tease
now there's a certain degree of this where we've just got to bide our time. I do think because there is that lack of consequence from a monetary standpoint, that it is potentially going to be the case that this board will sit on this for at least another 2 to 3 months.
Aye, but again, I'm the same as you. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I've got no bed sheets left to spray paint, and after the last small tea incident at the end, they budge out or whatever, I'll not be spraying any more of my bed sheets. But aye, Kev, what about you? What, too soon for protest? Kev, that's fine.
I think his EasyJet. I'm going round all the low-cost airlines here. His EasyJet broadband has given up the ghost again.
And you can answer for him then.
Oh no, he's back in the room. Over to you, Kev.
All right. No, I don't think it's the time yet. However, with the games coming up, not being in favour of Naismith in regards to who we are playing, I can see it happening. I can see bed sheets coming out. And Corbett, don't give us a lie that you didn't have any left. We know perfectly well that you bought 100, off of some Chinese boy. But I think there's a time and a place for it. I don't just yet think this is the time.
2:00 on Saturday in the Plaza. Right, cool. You're right, Kev.
I think maybe 6:00 or 4:45, maybe.
After the women's game on the Sunday.
That cause
There's a joke in there somewhere, and we're going to say it.
That'll upset them. Ando?
No. Not yet.
No.
Not at protest levels yet. I think I don't. This is really awkward. I like to think I've seen enough signs of stuff to be kind of positive about on the park under Naismith's direction. However, if you look at that over the entire piece that he's been in charge, and forget the whole Frankie McAvoy thing. It's all been Stevie Naismith. We know that, right? Then if I look at some of the stuff that I've seen enough green shoots there to go, actually, does he potentially have something? But then, if realistically I look at it, it's maybe half an hour, 45 minutes combined across what is maybe 7 or 8 or 10 matches. And is that enough to be able to give full confidence in them? No, it's definitely not. But I'm somewhere in the middle, right? I'm not at the throw shit at them and set fire to things protest stage. However, I'm still not at the stage where I can realistically say, hand on heart, I'm happy for them to stay. Somewhere in the middle.
Well, I actually think Scott makes a good point there. I think that you have to be clear as to what we're protesting. It's too soon to protest about Stephen Naismith being in charge. 100%. That's daft. You'd get absolutely nowhere, and it's redundant for the club. It puts everybody under too much pressure when we all want them to get better, etc. So protesting against Stephen Naismith being in the dugout, definitely not. But people made this decision. They can't. I personally, they cannot sulk out of getting away with this. Like, somebody sanctioned this somewhere along the lines. Now, I know that we had more than enough candidates apply. Some got interviewed, loads didn't. Again, it's that thing. So if there was to be any form of protest, it's at the board. It's not at the dugout. If that makes any sense. That's the only thing I would say. If there was, I'm the same. I think it's too soon, but we have to see some changes, and I don't know how we implement that.
I think as a general rule of thumb as well, I think the psychology around protests has changed. You look at someone like Anne Budge and the board as a whole, and I do think I get the impression that if they felt they acted or reacted to a protest, then they'll see that as A, failure, B, weakness, and C, potentially leading to encouraging fans to engage in that type of discourse in future instances as well. So I do think when people ask you that question, do you want to protest? There's that instinct in you to go, well, of course I do. I'm really annoyed about what's going on, and I feel passionately about the club, and I do think that there's a lot going wrong when it shouldn't be. But then when you look at the cold light of day, it just doesn't work these days. And I do think it would probably just end up getting their backs up. They would end up probably just rebelling against it and digging their heels in. It's why for all that it can be positive, it can sometimes unite fans. It can get the fans behind one common cause. I do think there's other ways that you can do it now through using social media and that, and also during the games. There is a way of making your voice heard sort of during games as well. So it's a case of maybe trying to get that across maybe over the coming weeks if performances and results don't pick up like we hope they do.
Well, from a listener's point of view, I am trying to speak to the club. I'm trying to see if we can get them on a podcast, see if we can talk to, whether it be Jerry Mallon, the Foundation of Hearts, whether it be Joe Savage, Andrew McKinley, Stephen Naismith, somebody to try and let's talk it out. Like where we at, what we're doing, because the longer that we don't get some answers or at least get the opportunity to ask questions, I think the more this grows. I think the more it becomes a thing, and if performances don't improve, then the noise for, as you said, bed sheets, protests, etc., will grow and grow and grow. So I'll keep everybody posted on social media how far along that path we get, if we get anywhere. So we'll keep these posted. Right, we might as well talk about the game that was Sunday. We played Motherwell at Tynecastle, lost 1-0. I loved Andy Halliday yesterday on Open Goal saying that they were watching the Old Firm in the changing rooms. That tickled my fancy. I thought, brilliant. That's exactly what I want to hear my club doing pre-game of a game where we could potentially go within touching distance of the top of the league. Let's go, Kev, if you've got your broadband. What was your thoughts pre-game, Motherwell, when you seen the team, etc., the setup? What were you thinking?
My initial thoughts on Sunday's team was, it's a team that should win a game convincingly. And then something was brought to my attention, as I said earlier on, for Billy Brown, that there's no balance in the team. There was no balance whatsoever in regards to how that team was going to perform, which the next 90 minutes, 120 minutes, if you want to take the whole thing, fell into exactly how he called it. We didn't have any sort of real understanding. I don't think the players had any real understanding as to where they should be on the park. We were, and I know that Corbett, you shared it on our on the chat, is that you've got a photograph of our left back slap bang right in the middle of the 18-yard line. You've got Raul standing like he's a missing link out of some sort of FIFA game. You've got our right back was going into left back, and we've got Shankland back in the defence line. Everybody was all over the place. Nobody knew what they were supposed to do. On paper, that team should have been more than good enough to beat a Motherwell side as far as I'm concerned.
Scott, what's your thoughts on the sort of shape, and when you seen the team Motherwell, what were your thinking?
It's really disjointed. I can see on paper what they're trying to achieve with that starting 11. I think what they're hoping to see is that, I think Oda, and to a larger extent Alex Lowry, they don't have the sort of game intelligence to really play in the right position when they're out wide. So what they tend to do is follow the ball, and they don't really put themselves in positions where they're making space for themselves. It's very much they want to get involved, and sometimes they end up just running into players or sort of forcing their way backwards. I think the hope was that if they're going to do that and sort of play more as sort of inverted kind of wingers, the hope would have been then that Atkinson and Cochrane would have been getting up and down the park and providing us that width. But unfortunately, Atkinson's kind of almost been reprogrammed into playing under this Pep sort of style of what we're wanting for a full back. And Alex Cochrane just looks lost out at left back because he's been, pushed and shoved into all sorts of different positions since the start of the season. So I think although on paper it probably had its merits, there's a lot of reasons why it didn't ultimately work. And again, you're playing with two central midfielders who are either lacking the technique or the mobility to really recycle the ball and take it into tight spaces. You've then got the two centre halves that aren't overly comfortable in the ball as well. And all teams are doing just now is sitting in, pressing when we get to that sort of halfway line and winning the ball back pretty easily, which is then leaving Shanklin and Boyce into a situation where they're having to drop deep or pull out wide to try and get involved. All our good play in the second half came through Shanklin pulling out wide and Boyce dropping into that number 10 position. But then we didn't have any bodies in the box. So, yeah, a lot to unpack there. But ultimately, whatever they were looking to try and achieve, it just didn't happen for them.
And I think that we've had this narrative running, and it comes when you play teams, Ando, like Kilmarnock, your Motherwells, etc., etc. This sort of myth or narrative that they put bodies behind the ball and just look to win free kicks and stop us playing. Or what. Motherwell were comfortable in the first 45 minutes. Like I felt they imposed their game on us more than we imposed our game on them. And what I mean by that is exactly what Scott said there. Teams are happy for us to have the ball because between Rowles and Kent and Cochrane and Atkinson, them passing the ball about the back line, football team, you come to Tynecastle, you cannot be happier watching the team play in front of you, going side to side. All you have to do is move along, and then wait for triggers. Right, it's into Devlin, it's into Haring. Right, push them. That's Shanklin's dropped 30 yards deep. Hallelujah. Your 30-goal striker is 25 yards in his own half. Brilliant. That's Motherwell's game plan, and we just don't seem to have a reaction or a counter to that. And it was the same with Kilmarnock as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think between everyone else, you've summed it up absolutely perfectly for me. I think the first half they they honestly must have been going in at halftime thinking, we fucking want to watch. We just see this out for the last 45 minutes easy. We'll run out maybe 2 or 3 or maybe even 4-0 winners here. The second half, I do think it did change slightly. I'm not going to shower praise on the team because I don't think it's warranted. But especially for the final 20-25 minutes, the amount of last-ditch efforts and blocks that were prevented from our point of view, it was significant. If you look at the amount of set pieces we had as well, right? If we had anyone that was actually any good on set pieces, the game would have been completely different. And on another day, then we would have won that game 3 or 4-1, right? But that doesn't get away from the fact that there was just so much. The best word I can use is ponderous, right? There was just not enough final cutting edge. There's not like that absolute sharpness in the final third of the park for me that means that performance was in any way justified. And Corbett, and for anyone else listening, if you've not listened to the Super Scoreboard podcast, I'm doing a shameless plug here for another podcast. Go back and listen to Corbett's interview on Super Scoreboard Live from earlier today, 6th of September, you rightly called out at some stage we had Shanklin playing right wing on Sunday. Like, what the fuck is that? It's absolute nonsense. It's just so many things that could have went our way that didn't, and there's so many things that ultimately were wrong. But it's
I think you said a good word there that I think is true as a sharpness. I think we lack sharpness right all over the park. I don't know, Scott, if it's something that these players can't break or get out of, but that sort of safety mode, if that's what you want to call it, that go into their shells and every pass has to be everything has to have a first touch and then a pass and a first touch and a pass, and they never skip a pass out. They'll never go Kent straight out to Atkinson. It always has to go through Rowles and then in, and it'll never go straight direct. And that sharpness, I don't know if it's confidence. I don't know if it's lack of what we actually supposed to be doing here. We set up the Boyce and Shankland scenario. We're almost begging Boyce to be Gino because it worked for us last year, or you're looking for an Oda to make the runs that Gino would look, and then Shankland's falling into pockets where you don't want your striker to be, but actually he's actually really good in those positions, but there's nobody there. There's no one in the box. There's no one making runs, so he becomes redundant.
I think we panic quite a lot when we go a goal down. It happened at Dens Park. We actually started really well for around 15-20 minutes when we made that triple change at Dens Park, but then we lost the goal, and then tactically, in terms of the decision making from the manager and the team, we just started to overload the box, so that the areas where we were creating space, we were now just congesting it and playing right into Dundee's hands. And I think we've done something similar on Sunday. When you look at the halftime subs, I found it very strange that they brought Tagawa on to play up front in that type of scenario. And I've made this point in the past with other players that we've signed, like a Connor Washington, for example. You know, you sign these guys, you sign these guys, and it's quite apparent that they're good at one thing, and that's stretching the back line when the back line are playing a slightly more advanced position and they're maybe 20-30 yards up for the edge of their 18-yard box. You can exploit that sort of lackey pace in their back line. We have in somebody who knows how to play on the shoulder and stretch them. And Gino was doing a bit of that last season as well in the last 6 months. Now, the problem when you're a goal down at home to Motherwell is that there's not going to be that space. They were quite happy to sit at the edge of the 18-yard box. So we threw Tagawa on, but there was no way we could use him. He barely touched the ball, and I don't think that was through any fault of his own. I just felt it was the wrong move. Putting him up front then meant that Shanklin was... I don't think they told Shanklin to go out wide right. I just think he thought, I'm going to have to try and make the game. I need to try and make something happen. So he's almost sort of drifted out there to try and obviously leave there to be a bit more space for Tagawa and Boyce to get involved in. And that's what I was saying earlier about it just being so disjointed. You know, that it's bad enough when the players are panicking, but when the manager's also making changes like that, which always strike me as a bit of an empty gesture. It's almost like, well, at least the fans can't say I didn't throw in all my forwards. And it's like, but all you're doing is just plugging space with bodies. They've done it at Dens Park. At 1-0, we were still playing quite well. We just lost a really poor, sloppy goal. If we'd kept Vargas on the park and just kept the guys who were doing well for that 20 minutes, we would have been fine. We might have got a goal back. But what he done was, he brought in Grant and Tagawa. He brought Tagawa on to play him wide right. Grant was making the same runs as Boyce, and all they were doing was just running into each other. And we made it so easy for Dundee just to go, this is great. Like, they're actually making it easier for us. So there's a lot going wrong just now, and it's not just on the players. A lot of the tactical decisions and, you know, the decision making when it comes to the subs, it just looks like token gestures. I don't see what we were hoping to achieve by putting Tagawa on at halftime and playing him up top. I don't know what, because he can't play with his back to goal, and he's still adapting to this style of football. Yeah. So what was he going to achieve in that 45 minutes when they were playing so deep?
I agreed. And Nando, I'll come to you in a wee second. What I was going to say there as well is that loads of the chances that we actually carved out were when Motherwell were down to 10 men and were happy to surrender space, because they were like, again, we're down to 10 men, we're at Tynecastle, their strikers wide right, their other strikers beside them, Vargas is causing us bother, but he's getting to the byline and cutting it back. There's no one there. There's nobody. So like they were happy for us to say, fine, I'll have the space, go wide, put it in your box because Mugabe's winning everything, not getting by him. And it was really annoying that Vargas was brilliant. Atkinson was doing great. They were getting to the byline and they cutting it back into spaces that nobody was. Nobody took a gamble. Nobody thought, right, well, he's got his man. I'll get to the front post. I'll get near
But
post.
like you say, they were conceding possession, weren't they? They were conceding possession out wide right because they were comfortable with that. What we needed to do on Sunday was, instead of bringing Tago on, bringing George Grant on and having somebody who could try and penetrate the game from the middle of the park from a deeper position and pull their players out from those comfortable areas. By going down wide left and wide right the whole second half, they were happy with that because they thought, like you say, Shanklin was out wide right the majority of the second half. So there was no one there really to pick up. So, yeah, spot on, mate.
And one of my things, Ando, and I don't know if you're going to talk about it there, is actually I would quite like us to come back and talk about set pieces for and against, because that it can't go on how ineffective we are with corners and free kicks, because it looks like loads of our plans for the games is to win set plays and we do nothing with it. We are not a single threat whatsoever from a by kick, for a free kick or a corner kick. And then the other one, zonal marking. I cannot believe that we've conceded to Palk at home by playing zone the ball out to the edge of the 18-yard box and scored, and we are still sticking with it. We bring everybody back. There's no out ball. We are overloaded in the middle of the park. We already know that we struggle to win headers and first contacts, and yet we don't put Boyce or Shankland or Varus or someone, put three of them on the halfway line and be like, deal with it. Because if it's header, we're launching it up the park and we're away here. We don't do it. We surrender all that space and we are redundant at set plays, and it boils my blood. They will use data, and Hearts have been big in it. Robbie Nielsen was big in it, right? There's the old adage of football: if you have the ball, then they don't, right? So you can dictate where you want teams to play. But the problem that we have is we're dictated as to where we play with the ball because we can't counter any form of press. So Motherwell, your Kilmarnock or whoever, and you've seen it with Rosenborg.
Yep.
Rosenborg were happy for us to have the ball. They pressed us. They were happy to take the ball in tight places for us to engage high up the park, and they popped it round us and they were away because that's what they want. They set traps. It's what good football teams do. Right, your Shankland and Boyce are hunting in packs, or Devlin and Haring will come and they'll come to contact. Right, sound. Take the ball in a tight space, pop it there, pop inside, and you're away. You've taken two of them out of the game, and that bugs me. You see that all the time. Our stats are always 50-60% possession, loads and loads of passes, entries into the opposition box, all the modern football manager stuff. But the one that no one talks about is fuck all shots and targets, no goals, and nothing for the 15 corner kicks and free kicks and deliveries into the box that we had. So that is just part of modern football, unfortunately. I don't think we play the game by data, but it's definitely where it is. Right, Andrew, before we
I was just going to say,
up.
line drawn, fucking, and if you want to go back to what you were talking about, which is zonal is dead and how we are shite at set pieces, then that's it.
It's very telling how poor we are at corners. And here's my last point, actually. I sit section X now, right behind the goal. In the first half, Zander Clark was in front of us. I think I heard maybe 3 shouts the whole first half. 1 was from him, 2 was from Kent. That was about it. I think there were 1 they call Oda Utaro, which I find, how easier is it to shout Oda than shouting Utaro? Like, just shout Oda. Like, it's so much quicker and easier. Liam Kelly for the second half was in front of us, and he must have went home not being able to speak because he screamed at his backline every single minute of that game. Touch tight, man on, he's coming, get the ball long, get in his face, get up. Like, he just barked and barked and barked at his defenders, and they did every single thing that he asked them to do. And again, I've had this problem, and you know this, Ando and Kev, so I'll also go to Scott. I've got a real problem with, we're never going to have Craig Gordon, right? So was Craig Gordon just elite level, never in a lifetime will we get there, and Xander Clark is actually a really, really good goalkeeper? Or is Xander Clark actually nowhere near as good as where we need him to be or where he should be?
I think Xander Clark suffers from the fact that goalkeeper is a position that we've been blessed with probably during all our lifetime. You look back at goalkeeper, probably centre half as well, to a smaller extent. Those are the two positions where you could talk for hours about all the great players that we've seen playing those areas. I think Xander Clark's a decent keeper. I don't know if I quite agree about the whole sort of needing to be vocal. I think, players should know how to play their position and when to get touch tight and when not to. I don't think they need that barked at them. But if it helps them, then so be it. I think Kent's come in and he's done a reasonable job at sort of, communicating. And I think he has helped to a certain degree in that area. But in terms of Xander Clark, I think he does a decent job for us. I think he was a really good number two. And I mean, when he first signed, you sort of thought, well, this is great. In terms of a number two, this is as good as it gets, probably for a club outside the old firm. He's maybe suffering because, the forwards aren't doing their job. Well, when I say forwards, I'm just meaning the team as a whole when it comes to attacking. Xander Clark is pulling off some decent saves when he needs to. He has the odd mishap, but generally speaking, he's doing okay. I think the problem is that we're focusing on areas everywhere across the park when really our biggest problem's probably centre midfield. That's probably where we're really struggling. We've got this embarrassment of Richie in terms of number sixes, but we've got really nobody that can play a sort of playmaker role. And without Benny, we've got no one who's got the ability and mobility to be able to ball in tight spaces and sort of recycle possession. And he's probably the player, maybe closely followed by Mackay and Halkett, that we're really struggling without just now. I think Craig Gordon, you can get by without Craig Gordon in your team. I think we can do okay with Xander Clark there. But for me, Mackay, Halkett and Benny are the three that we're really struggling without, because they're all brave in possession and they would really help sort of build that spine of a team that we had for over a year. So those are the three that we really need to try and get back as quickly as we can.
Aye. Well, I suppose my point is Liam Kelly Bart orders at his hing with every turnover of the ball. They score from a turnover where our centre half, Kyrell's, is standing on the fucking 18-yard box scratching his balls, hasn't a fucking clue where he is or where he's supposed to be. Our goalkeeper reacts slow to come out. Why they think that's offside, why it was given as offside. I have to stand like that to see below the bar in section 8. He's miles onside. Like, how have you given that? And I think that was where my point is. I think he said he's made some good stuff, and we say this all the time. You lose football matches, every single person on the park is under the microscope. I just look at the goal on Thursday, where he sets up his wall, and then where the ball ends up. You're supposed to set up your wall to cover a post, and you cover the other. He stands behind his wall, goes into the bottom corner, Coven trundled along the ground. Yeah, it's probably offside. Very reminiscent of the Kevin Nesbitt free kick at Tynecastle last year, because I was right behind it in section G. He sets his wall up there and then he covers that post and then gets beat at the post by mediocre strike. The Pauk one as well. Like, I think Gordon saves that. But again, that's probably just more my view on the team because I'm angry at fucking everything. And before we tie it off, is there anything that's came up on YouTube or anything that we haven't addressed or spoke about?
No, not really. Just one thing that did stick out from Graham Duthie. Like, pointless substitution. What the fuck is bringing Forrest on at 88 minutes got to do with anything? Absolute senseless waste of time. A couple of things here. Vargas has got to start most weeks. We absolutely have to be the worst team in the league at set pieces. The lack of reaction all over the park to go on a goal down, and then other themes around communication, which is to your point. I think about goalkeeper trying to marshal the defence and whatnot. But it's just,
was it Kelly? Was it Kelly where we made like 3 subs in the 91st minute or something like that? Was it Pauk? I remember a game where we brought
I think it was Pauk.
Pauk.
We brought
Pauk,
Fire and somebody else on in the last minute.
Aye.
Maybe Oda,
in like the
Oda
91st
Fire
minute or something.
came on.
Aye, and I'm like,
Would you bother? Why?
what are you doing? What's the point in that? Right, but I'm feeling it better. I don't know if that was cathartic or if it's just made me go on home to punch my pilly and rip my bedsheet off and start spray painting it. I don't know. You'll see them all on the plaza, I suppose.
Fair.
Right, Scott, thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to everybody on YouTube as well for getting involved. Obviously, next time we'll probably pod will be pre-Aberdeen game, and then after the Aberdeen game. Aye, thanks everybody. See you all soon.
Before we go,
Cheers, guys.
just because he's not here, we need to sort of pay a nod to Tam. And I know that the transfer window is shut, but can we just fucking sell Tam and get Scott back next week? Does that work for everyone?
Yeah, well, aye, we can put a transfer request in.
Cheers, lads.
Right, boys.
You need to put it to the board, guys.
Cheers.
Cheerio.
Cheers.
Gorgero.